She grew up in the suburbs. She worked a desk job. She knew nothing about hunting, foraging, or surviving a winter without a thermostat. And right now, she lives more than 100 miles from the nearest town, on 7 acres in the Alaskan interior, teaching hundreds of thousands of people how to preserve food, identify wild plants, and stay alive in one of the harshest environments on the continent. Her name is Amy Westerlind. She is the face behind Holdfast Alaska, a channel that went from 0 to over 200,000 subscribers in under 2 years, built on nothing more than a GoPro, a belief, and a willingness to start over completely. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly who Amy is, why she's not the person most viewers assume she is, and what it actually took to get her to that cabin in the wilderness. The first thing to understand about Amy Westerlind is where she started. Not in a field, not on a farm, not anywhere near a wilderness. She started in an apartment, a small one, in eastern Massachusetts. She had grown up in a densely populated New England town, the kind of place where you know your neighbors, traffic backs up at rush hour, and the idea of hunting your own food belongs in a history book. Dennis, her husband, grew up the same way. 2 suburban kids from the same corner of New England, with the same zero experience in anything related to the land. When they were first married, Amy worked as a company secretary for her father-in-law's lobster fishing operation. Dennis hauled lobster traps for a living. They were inside the same world they'd always known, structured, familiar, and very far from anything that looked like an off-grid homestead. But the thought kept surfacing, the idea of a different life, quieter, more intentional, built with their own hands. Amy started small. She grew tomatoes in pots on their apartment patio. That was the beginning. Not a dramatic moment, not a revelation, just a woman with a pot of soil and a seed, looking out at the edge of something she couldn't fully name yet. They started researching. They read everything they could find. They took weekend trips to Maine and walked in the woods. Slowly, the dream stopped being abstract and started becoming a plan. Nobody in their circles saw it coming. And here's the part that changes everything about what you just heard. The plan became real when Amy and Dennis found a piece of land on Craigslist in western Maine. $5,000. That's what it cost. Overgrown, cleared of nothing, no power, no running water, no internet. Most people would have scrolled past it. They bought it. And then they started building. From scratch. With no prior construction experience, no contractors, and no safety net. They cleared the land themselves. They built a basic structure themselves. They lived without electricity. They lived without running water. They learned how to do all of it, not from courses, not from YouTube, but from books and from the people who lived around them in rural Maine. This is where Amy's identity began to shift in a way that would define everything that followed. She didn't just learn homesteading as a concept. She became an herbalist. She built real, working knowledge of plants, what heals, what preserves, what nourishes. Dennis farmed and took odd jobs to keep things moving. Together, they were building a skill set from the ground up, the same way they'd built that first cabin. Slowly, by hand, with a lot of failure between each success. They sold the finished cabin, moved to a nearby farmhouse, and continued learning farming. The main chapter was never meant to be the destination. It was the training ground. They knew it, and they knew the real destination was still a long way north. What happened next is the reason this story spread across the internet. In November 2020, Amy and Dennis loaded their car with everything they owned and drove 3,200 miles from their main homestead to the port of Bellingham, Washington. Their daughter Lena was in the back seat. The destination was Alaska, a place neither of them had ever visited. They boarded a ferry. What they sailed into was a 5-day crossing through the northern Pacific with seas that hit 36 feet. Dennis had worked on lobster boats since he was a young man. He had seen rough water. He said this was different. Amy described arriving in Alaska midwinter as almost deliberately extreme, almost smarter to get here in the wintertime, she said later. We got the full blast right off the bat. They landed on the Kenai Peninsula and purchased a 2-acre homestead on the edge of the Kenai National Wildlife Refuge. They fished for salmon on the Kenai River. They hunted moose. They learned the rhythms of coastal Alaska, the salmon runs, the hunting seasons, the way daylight disappears in winter until the sun barely clears the horizon before pulling back again. But it wasn't enough, not for what they were actually after. It was a bit too crowded, Dennis said later. Too much like Maine. What they were looking for wasn't just off-grid living. It was something more elemental than that. A place where the wilderness wasn't backdrop, where it was the actual structure of daily life. Most people who know this story stop here. But the real story starts right now. In spring of 2024, Amy and Dennis Westerlind made a second move inside Alaska. This one went deeper, much deeper. They paid cash for a small, off-grid log cabin on 7 acres near the northern entrance of Wrangell St. Elias National Park, the largest national park in the United States, larger than the entire country of Switzerland. Their mailing address is Slana, Alaska, population a few dozen people. The nearest city with a full grocery store is a 6-hour drive away. Some supply runs to Anchorage take 17 hours round trip. Their property borders the national park and sits along a river they use for fishing. To collect water, they trek to a local river, and they have encountered wolves on those treks. Bears have gotten into their chicken coop. Summer forest fires have burned acreage near their land. But the most significant thing about where they chose to settle isn't the danger, it's the legal designation. Because of their remote location, the Westerlinds live inside what Alaska designates as a subsistence zone, a legally defined area where residents are permitted to harvest significantly higher quantities of wild food from the land than anywhere else in the state. On the Kenai, their family was allowed to dip net and keep 45 sockeye salmon per year. In the subsistence zone, that number is 500. Their hunting seasons begin earlier. Their bag limits on moose, elk, deer, bear, and porcupine are substantially higher than anywhere else in Alaska. They chose this location specifically for that reason. They wanted to live off the land, not partially, not mostly, but as completely as any modern family in America is attempting to do. That move, to the subsistence zone, is also what finally pushed them to start filming. And if you think that was surprising, stay with me, because this next part is why the whole story matters. They bought a GoPro, that was it. No production team, no elaborate setup, no content strategy. In September 2024, Dennis and Amy Westerlind pointed a camera at their lives in the Alaskan interior and started posting what they found. Hunting moose, building a living roof chicken coop designed to stay warm through -40 winters, driving supply routes that lasted the better part of a day, preserving salmon without electricity, the traditional method of sun, smoke, and wind. We bought a GoPro and just started taking videos of ourselves messing around on the homestead, and people took to it, Dennis said. What set Holdfast Alaska apart from the beginning was what Amy brought to it. Most homesteading channels in this space are built around agriculture, gardens, livestock, harvests, land management. The Westerlinds deliberately chose a different lane, subsistence, the act of taking what the wilderness offers and turning it into a full, functioning life. And within that frame, Amy was the channel's distinctive voice. She wasn't just showing people how to survive, she was showing them how to make it feel like a life worth living. Moose chili made from an animal Dennis harvested that morning. Salmon dip from fish they preserved using nothing but air and smoke. Sourdough donuts, lacto-fermented pickles, herbal medicines drawn from plants she had been studying for years. The same skills she built in that main cabin. The herbalism, the food preservation, the deep knowledge of wild ingredients, became the content that drove the channel's growth. In under a year, the channel passed 52,000 subscribers. By 2026, that number had crossed 216,000, with more than 32 million total views across 181 videos. She never talked about this publicly. Until now, people who follow Holdfast Alaska understand quickly that the channel runs on two distinct energies. Dennis builds, hunts, and navigates the physical demands of the property, the construction projects, the heavy game, the infrastructure of subsistence living. Amy does something harder to define, and in some ways more central to what makes the channel work. She translates. Amy's role on Holdfast Alaska is to take the raw, physically demanding reality of their life and make it accessible, not by softening it, but by giving it a framework that someone in a suburb can actually understand and use. Her canning demonstrations are practical and detailed. Her foraging content is specific, particular plants, particular seasons, particular preparation methods. Her herbal medicine knowledge didn't come from a weekend course. It came from years of self-directed study that started in Maine and deepened in Alaska. She is also, by her own description, the channel's philosophical engine. When she talks about why they started filming, she doesn't mention subscriber counts or income potential. She talks about the gap she saw between people who wanted a different life and the information they needed to pursue it. I wanted to make the channel somewhere we could teach and help people learn to can, forage, or use herbal medicine, Amy said. We wanted to give value to people who want to live a similar life, or even people who don't live this way. Providing inspiration is huge because that's what got us started. That language, providing inspiration, isn't marketing copy. It's the direct line back to the couple who took weekend trips to Maine and slowly let an idea grow into a decision. But there is a side of Amy's presence on the channel that most casual viewers overlook entirely. Here's what the comments kept asking, and here's the answer they never got, until now. For much of Holdfast Alaska's existence as a public channel, the family kept their surname offline entirely. Multiple major media outlets, including publications with millions of readers, ran full features on the Westerlinds in early 2025 without ever publishing their last name. The name Holdfast Alaska was the entire identity. Amy and Dennis were simply Amy and Dennis. They had made a deliberate choice to share their lifestyle without fully surrendering their private identity to the internet. That choice extended to their daughter Lena. Her face has never appeared on the channel. Viewers know she exists. Her voice, small and excited, occasionally surfaces in the background of videos. Amy and Dennis have spoken warmly about raising her in the wilderness, about how capable and cold-adapted she is, about what it means to grow up on a homestead where the land is teacher. But her face remains protected. Her visual identity belongs to the family, not to the audience. The cabin interior is also kept largely private. The camera shows the view from the balcony, the land, the work, but not the personal living space inside. These are not oversights. They are active decisions made by a family that understands, perhaps better than most creators in this space, that the line between sharing a life and losing one is real. The name Westerlind finally entered public circulation through a feature published by the Epoch Times in October 2025, the most detailed profile the family had permitted at that point. Even then, the privacy architecture around Lena and the cabin interior remained unchanged. It's a specific kind of choice. Public enough to build a community of 200,000 people. Private enough to keep the things that actually matter out of reach. At this point in the story, most people walked away. What she did instead is the part nobody talks about. 2 years. That is the full lifespan of Holdfast Alaska as of 2026. In that time, the channel accumulated 32 million views and over 216,000 subscribers. Third-party analytics estimates place the channel's monthly revenue somewhere between $8,000 and $12,000, a figure drawn from AdSense rates, channel membership tiers, and estimated view income. Across the full operating period, those same sources estimate total earnings of approximately $650,000. Those are estimates, not confirmed figures, but they are drawn from publicly available channel data, and they tell a story that matters for understanding what Amy actually built. She built financial independence from a 7-acre off-grid property in one of the most remote corners of the United States. Starting with a GoPro and no production budget, in under 2 years. To put that in context, most homesteading channels take 3 to 5 years to reach 50,000 subscribers. Holdfast Alaska cleared that number in its first year. Most channels at the 200,000 subscriber level have been active for 4 to 6 years. Holdfast Alaska got there in 18 months. The growth is not accidental. It connects directly to Amy's content philosophy. The focus on practical, transferable knowledge delivered without performance. No dramatic confessionals, no manufactured conflict, no heavily edited spectacle. Just 2 people in the Alaskan interior doing the work, and one of them explaining it in a way that makes you feel like you could try it too. The channel's subscriber community, built around a membership tier, adds another income stream and a layer of direct connection between the family and the people who follow them. The kind of relationship that YouTube's algorithm alone doesn't produce. One phone call, one conversation. That's all it took to change the direction of everything. The version of this story that circulates in the comments, the idealized one, the one that inspires the most shares, is the one where Amy and Dennis walked away from ordinary life and landed in paradise. That is not the full version. They walked away from ordinary life and into years of cold, hard work before any of this made sense. The main cabin had no running water, no electricity, no internet. They built it from scratch with no prior construction skills. The ferry crossing to Alaska in November 2020 ran through 36-foot seas for 5 days. They arrived in the Alaskan winter and described it as getting the full blast right off the bat. They found the Kenai too crowded and moved again, deeper into the interior, further from infrastructure, closer to the edge of what a modern family can reasonably sustain. The current homestead operates with bears threatening the chicken coop, wolves near the water source, and forest fires that periodically burn the surrounding land. Getting seriously injured, really seriously, means being more than 100 miles from the nearest hospital, and they chose all of it. Every step. including the choice to stay when the winter is at its most unrelenting. Amy has said that she and Dennis still find their situation almost impossible to believe when they step back from it. That if someone had told them during their apartment years in Massachusetts that this is where they'd end up, they would have laughed. That disbelief isn't a sign that they stumbled into this life accidentally. It's a sign of how far they actually traveled, not just geographically. The name Holdfast Alaska is not a branding exercise, it is a description. To hold fast means to grip something tightly and refuse to let go. It is a sailing term, the act of clinging to something solid when everything around you is moving. That is what Amy Westerlind has been doing since she planted tomatoes in pots on a Massachusetts patio and started thinking about something bigger. Amy Westerlind's story doesn't fit the template most people reach for when they think about off-grid creators. The seasoned outdoors person, the lifetime farmer, the person born into this world. She was a secretary from the suburbs who decided, slowly and then all at once, that the life she was living was not the one she was going to keep. What she built from that decision, across Maine, across Alaska, across a channel that now reaches millions of people, is not an escape story. It's a reconstruction story. Piece by piece, skill by skill, move by move. As of 2026, Holdfast Alaska is active, growing, and filming from one of the most remote homesteads currently being documented on YouTube. Amy is still foraging, still canning, still teaching herbal medicine, still raising Lena somewhere behind the camera. The channel continues to build toward a community that doesn't just watch the life, it learns from it. The question worth sitting with is this. Amy had no background, no skills, no experience in any of this when she started. So what is your reason for not starting?